أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Ramadan Kareem to you and your families. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our fasting, our sadaqah, our charity, our zakat, our recitation of the Quran, our increased worship during the month of Ramadan. Today, inshallah, I will talk about our fasting as a way of strengthening our immune system against sins. Immune system or immunity means that we are resistant against something, against external influences, but also it means protection. So in this sense, fasting builds or strengthens our resistance against sins and protects us from outside influences. We learn that from three sources. We learn that from the Quran, we learn that from Hadith of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, and we learn that from our own experience. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. O you who have believed, fasting is prescribed to you as it was prescribed to those before you to reach taqwa. Taqwa, we understand the word taqwa as something that will, or awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we are aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that awareness will make us less likely to commit sins. When we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is observing us, that He is watching us, that means that we will commit less sins. And it's human nature that we change our behavior when we know that someone is watching us, someone is observing us. So we change a little bit our behavior. And in modern days, we see on buildings, when we see a CCTV, when we see cameras around, that in a certain way protects people inside, and less crime is committed because criminals are aware that someone is watching them or observing them. But with Muslims, we know that at every step someone is observing us. At every step Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching us. And in that way, fasting is strengthening our taqwa, or through fasting we're reaching taqwa, but also through taqwa, through awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is less likely that we will commit any sin. And we also find it in a hadith of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam that fasting is protecting us. He said in a hadith, as-siyamu junnatun. Siyam or fasting is shield. As with every shield, if we don't use it properly, if we don't handle any shield properly, that will have a limited effect on our protection. So with fasting, we have to engage with fasting in a complete way and most sincere way. So fasting is not only with our stomachs, abstaining from food and drinks. Fasting is also about abstaining from saying something that is inappropriate, from hearing or seeing something that is inappropriate. In that way, fasting will have its complete effects on our spiritual and physical well-being. We find also that fasting strengthens our immune system against sins through our own experience. How many times we found ourselves during the month of Ramadan that we don't want to say something because it's Ramadan. We don't want to say something because we are fasting. We don't want to lessen the value of our fasting and lessen the rewards that we want or we expect to receive because it is Ramadan. And we abstain from saying something, or we abstain even from saying a joke that we suspect that could lessen the value and the reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How many times we found ourselves that we don't want to hear something that is inappropriate because it's Ramadan and we are fasting, or we don't want to see something that is inappropriate because it is Ramadan. And this is a true evidence of the effect of fasting on our daily lives, on our spirituality, and on our physical well-being. And in addition to that, how many times we realize that most of our good deeds we want to do during the month of Ramadan. We increase our worship. We are not only fasting, but we are also increasing our obligatory as well as our voluntary prayers, our du'as, our supplications, our qiyam during the nights of the month of Ramadan. And we want to do more during the month of Ramadan because it is blessed month. When do we give more sadaqah? During the month of Ramadan, we are copying the example or following the example of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. He was the most generous man in his community, and he was most generous during the month of Ramadan. When do we give zakah? We give during the month of Ramadan. When do we pay membership to our masajids and Islamic organizations? During the month of Ramadan. We do that hoping that we will achieve multiple rewards by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we are following the example of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Through these three examples, brothers and sisters, through the Quran that tells us that we will reach taqwa and that we will reach total awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the example of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, in which he advises us that our fasting will protect us and will make us more resistant to sins, to the hadith in which Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam said that during the month of Ramadan, shaitans, devils are chained, that the hellfire is, the gates of hellfire are closed, that the gates of paradise are open. We see with our own eyes, in our own lives, in our own experience, that we are getting a little bit better during the month of Ramadan. Even the people who do sins or commit sins openly and still consider themselves Muslims, they avoid doing sins and committing sins during the month of Ramadan. They wait until after Eid al-Fitr, and then they continue with their wicked acts. But they abstain during the month of Ramadan. So we see the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, the promise of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam in hadith. We see that in our own lives, that Ramadan is making its impact on our lives. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make every Ramadan in our lives better and better, because Ramadan is a continuous school and continuous course that we take every year, that we are learning new things, that we are revising old things, that we are reviewing what we have memorized, what we know that we should do. And this is continuous struggle to be better, to improve our lives, to improve our spiritual well-being. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us in those endeavors. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from the devil. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our families. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our du'as, our supplications, our prayers, our recitation of the Quran, our fasting. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and your families. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.